That was incredibly unsatisfying. Cheers, everyone. Good shit. Let's get started. Hundreds of millions of people across the whole world are unemployed. And it affects not just those individuals, but it also affects their families and communities, which can lead to dreams being postponed or just completely unachievable in the first place. At worst, though, it means that they can't afford basic necessities like food and housing. And of course, beyond, or rather perhaps because of these material hardships, it also affects their mental health and can make them feel completely isolated from or even abandoned by the rest of society. And it so happens that I am one of those people. I've been unemployed for about 6 months now, and I recently reached a bit of a breaking point where I figured I could either continue wallowing in my own misery, or I could try to use the spare time that I now have to do something that I find rewarding and creative and interesting, while also feeling like I've actually accomplished something for once. Because sending out a bazillion job applications is not giving after 6 months of just doing that. And so, this video is the result of me choosing to do the latter. I chose to make a video on this topic in particular as a way to sort of process the whole experience for myself. So, thanks for being my therapist, but I also chose to make a video essay in general because I am one of those wokes you've heard so much about.
Oh, you're a woke.
In other words, I love getting injected with autistic vaccines. I believe trans people deserve to exist, and I'm not scared of completely normal-looking female video game characters.
There seems to be this weird assumption that gamers can't or won't take a female character seriously if they find them physically attractive, so the only solution is to reduce or remove any element of attractiveness and sensuality, producing bland, ugly, unappealing models that nobody wants to look at.
That you guys suck at doing nowadays. Making the women attractive. Jill, Mid, Tarja here. Benedicta, I mean, that was a seductress. She was hot. She knew it. She worked it. I mean, it was sexy. It's not like these ugly-ass characters that they want to make in these AAA games nowadays. It's ridiculous.
Female video game characters aren't making my pee-pee hard anymore, and for some reason, that's everyone else's problem. Wah, I'm a fragile little man baby. Jokes aside, the point is, I've consumed a lot of BreadTube, whoever she is, over the past decade or so. So, you know, I wanted to try to make my own video essay. This is my attempt to throw some YouTube spaghetti at the wall and see what sticks. Now you might be thinking, what's this video about then? But before we get into the specifics, the nitty-gritty as it were, beyond it's about unemployment, duh, I figured I'd give you some more basic background info so you have some context for what kind of jobs I'm looking for, seeing as it's going to be relevant to the topic. So, I'm 28 years old. I've taken way too fucking long to finish university for a variety of reasons. I have a master's degree in political science from June of 2024, and I'm trying to get a job within public administration, to put it very broadly. Or I'm looking into possibly doing a PhD, because for some reason, my idea of fun is to write an academic paper for 4 to 5 years. That is, of course, assuming my imposter syndrome lets me, believe in myself enough to actually, do that. Regardless, my only semi-relevant job experience is working for 2 years at my student union as a student ombudsman. So, according to a lot of employers, no experience at all. Now, the job market will, of course, look different for you based on where you live and what education and experience you have. However, I guess my hope is that this video can still be some #relatable content. Right before I became unemployed, I was studying 150%, and working 30%, all while trying to get my driver's license. It was a very stressful time, as you can imagine. But it was also fulfilling in its own right. You know, when I finally got my master's degree, finished up my extra courses, and passed my driving tests, it felt great. I was riding a pretty big high for a short while. But after being very productive and stressed out to the brink of burning out, maybe you can imagine the absolute whiplash I felt when all of a sudden, after graduating and completing all these things, I had nothing to do besides, of course, apply for jobs. But that is a fairly mundane and generally not a very time-consuming task. It kept me occupied for a short little while, but due to it being so mundane, it has at this point become a chore of a task. It just sucks the life force out of me every time I sit down and have to do it. It doesn't challenge me to evolve and think in new ways or be creative. It just challenges me to find new and creative ways to suck up to employers, I guess. Or, you know, the latest in AI application tracking BS. Cover letters and CVs are also a very unrewarding form of writing, and this is coming from someone who got really excited at the prospect of writing, you know, my bachelor's and master's thesis, and as we've gone through, I'm excited about the prospect of writing a PhD. I'm a fucking nerd. Leave me alone, okay? Compared to previous studies and, you know, part and full-time jobs, where I would get some kind of feedback pretty much constantly, you know, grades from teachers, praise from colleagues or bosses, I now get no useful constructive criticism. And worst of all, no external validation. So, you know, here I am, making a YouTube video. Please pay attention to me. Basically, I'm in control of my own happiness at the moment. Which is scary because I can be really good at just wallowing down in my own sadness and anxiety unless I distract myself by staying productive. Is that particularly healthy? Absolutely not. So, in a way, I guess this is the time in my life when I actually have to face this incessant need to stay productive head on, which I'm trying to do by seeing a therapist. And I also try to regularly tell myself that I don't have to be productive to have value. Working on this video has also been a huge help, seeing as it's really my own project that I can do at my own pace. Now, when you have a job, I imagine it typically comes with some feeling of accomplishment. This is probably me romanticizing and being nostalgic about the time that I worked at the student union. I'm sure plenty of you do not feel super accomplished or fulfilled at your jobs. Regardless, I still feel like a plumber will fix a broken pipe, an office worker will file a report, a bricklayer will build a wall, a researcher will publish a paper. You get it. But what if you rarely or never get rewarded or feel accomplished for your efforts? What if your boss never acknowledges your successes and never gives you any feedback on your failures? That's kind of what job hunting feels like, at least for me personally. Besides the occasional, you remain an interesting candidate, but we are not interviewing you at this time, and then they never get back to you, I rarely find out if my job application was good or bad, or why that is the case. This also means I don't get to grow or improve my, job application skills, and I also don't get to, grow or improve as a person, which is something that I value very highly. For all I know, my applications could be perfect, spotless even. But my general lack of experience just automatically sorts me into the no pile. And that could be like really early on in the process, so I'm never even considered for anything. On the other hand, my application could be awful and in big need of improvement. But of course, therein lies the issue. I can just sit here and speculate on these things, at least until maybe I get an interview or two. And the last time I actually got invited to an interview was in May of 2024. So when I was still finishing up my master's degree, before I even became, full-time unemployed. Beyond the general lack of fulfillment or meaningful feedback, job hunting is also incredibly humiliating. You're expected to treat every potential employer as your ideal workplace and every job as your dream job. Being unemployed and out of university, I can't be super picky right now. I have to pretend like I care so much about this government agency and how they filed their taxes or something. And because of this, like the icing on the bullshit cake, lying or exaggerating is directly baked into job hunting. Hell, if you look at the world at large, lying for money seems to be a phenomenon you can't escape. You can't be on the internet for 5 seconds without someone trying to sell you a get-rich-quick scheme like MLMs, cryptocurrency, or, Andrew Tate selling an online course on how to get your dick wet. So when job hunting, you have to lie, or at the very least you have to exaggerate to play by the system's rules, as it were. I have a friend of a friend who refused to lie or exaggerate and was really honest about their general lack of passion. And it took them 5 years to find any job. Now, while I do have passions and interests that are relevant to some jobs, it's not like they're going to align with every job that I apply for, especially as someone who's just trying to enter the job market in the first place. And I feel scummy as hell when I pretend to be really passionate about a job or employer when I'm really not. What I'm the most passionate about right now is getting a job. If I end up enjoying the job itself and vibing with the workplace, that is a very nice bonus, a bonus that will probably make me want to stay in that workplace longer, but right now it's far from my primary concern. And I imagine this is what a lot of people, especially looking for their first job or who have been outside the job market for a long while, feel like. So, I'm sitting there,
Barbecue sauce on my titties.
anxiously awaiting a response that could come a week or 3 months or even 6 months after applying to the job, only to not only not get a job, but get nothing meaningful out of the whole application process. You just get a standard email that says, "You applied for job, you did not get job. Good luck, have fun." And at that point, all the work I've done adjusting my cover letter and CV can feel like a complete waste of time. I realize that in the long run, all those improvements and adjustments will pay dividends eventually, but my silly monkey brain can't think that far ahead. I'm already miserable in the here and the now. Now, I do understand why this is the case, and it's not like I think every employer is out to get me in particular, Some of them have a lot of applications to sift through, which means that if an application doesn't stand out, it might not be seen for more than 5 seconds by someone in HR. Of course, if it stands out too much or feels like it's too AI generatey, that might also send you straight into the hell no pile. That being said, I have a harder time empathizing with a faceless organization than I have with fellow struggling human beings, and at the end of the day, they are the ones holding all the cards in this situation. All this brings me to a feeling of hopelessness. It is, after all, very demotivating when you apply to job after job, nothing to show for it. It ends up being very easy to find the whole thing pointless. Why continue? I'll never get a job anyway. I'm unemployable. I'm useless. All these thoughts pop into my head. And for me, it's a spiral that leads to a lot of anxiety and pure existential dread. The first month after getting my master's degree, I was in a constant state of anxiety because of the aforementioned going from doing too much to the tipping point of burnout to having nothing going on and no long-term goals beyond get a job, which is very broad as far as goals go. Without being distracted by a day job and having way too much time on my hands, my existential dread then makes me think about the state of the world at large. Fascism's comeback tour, Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the genocide in Gaza, Trump's re-election, the climate crisis. Why would I care about my career anyway if everything is so god-awfully fucked. All that being said, my personal experience of unemployment is fairly limited, right? I'm definitely not dealing with the worst of the shit sandwich here, which means it's time to check my privilege for a second. As it currently stands, I'm doing fine. I live in Sweden, a rich country with all manner of safety nets, for now. I also come from a middle-class background, and I have a partner that I live with, that I can share expenses with. And so, beyond the temporary issue of me being more dependent on my partner and also my parents, I will be just fine. I obviously can't and don't want to live like that for the rest of my life. I would like to make my own money, but the fact that I can, even temporarily, is pure luck, right? So the issues I experience are much more about my mental health and this existential dread that we've been over, and a lot less about my material socioeconomic situation. But for a lot of people, unemployed people the world over, it's not just about the potential existential dread of, woe is me, I have nothing fun or creative to do with my time, but the literal existential dread of whether they get to feed their family or not, or have a roof over their head. And even if they do, the constant stress of not making next month's rent is ever present. How there are people working something like 2 full-time jobs who still have to worry about some of or all of those things. If we use Maslow's hierarchy of needs to sort of illustrate this, you can see that I'm somewhere around here. So apart from the fact that I don't currently feel a strong sense of belonging to society at large in the form of contributing to it in some way, it's not like I lack any networks or forms of community. I also have my basic needs met. I eat, I sleep, for the most part. I have a roof over my head, and I regularly take walks, exercise at the gym or local swimming pool. But someone who is unemployed and doesn't have these sort of basic needs met, for example, someone who is homeless, faces significantly bigger hurdles to finding employment, right? Something as simple as having an address or a phone is almost always a requirement to apply for a job in the first place. You can no longer just waltz into a store and hand them your CV, right? And even if you end up getting an interview, there are a lot of unspoken rules and dress codes. And obviously, if you don't have access to a shower or a bath, that might make a bad impression. It's an all too familiar cycle for a lot of people. And it's also a cycle that is really, really hard to get out of, as we'll see later. I'm sort of reminded of the millionaire Mike Black, who deliberately became homeless and destitute and cut himself off from his networks, all to prove that with just the right Sigma grind set, anyone can get out of homelessness and poverty. Hell, even become a millionaire all in no time. Now, if you're familiar, you'll remember that the experiment failed long before he even came close to reaching his goal of earning $1 million in 1 year. His stated reasons for failing were health concerns for himself, as well as his dad taking ill during the experiment's runtime. Now, that is of course awful, but most people can't just quit being poor because of processing health concerns for themselves or their family. He always had a way out, no matter how much he tried to control the parameters of his experiment. He also already had skills and knowledge going into it that someone who has been homeless, especially for an extended period of time, would have an exponentially harder time picking up. So, in order for neoliberalism to be sold to us, we have to believe that everyone can make it with just the right mindset. But that's a lie. The reality is that a large number of factors outside one's own control affect whether or not you make it. We might describe those factors as someone being either lucky or unlucky. How lucky someone is, well, that's a matter of what gender or ethnicity you have, what country or neighborhood within your country that you live in or were born in particular, what class you were born into. All these things and more contribute to someone's level of success, let's say. And while this can be hard to admit on a personal level because it might feel like it undermines our own accomplishments, I don't believe it does. Hard work is hard work. Be proud of what you can do, but the obstacles put in someone else's path might have made that same hard work even harder for them, or removed their opportunity to show off their hard work in the first place. Not to mention the fact that we all too often conflate a person's worth with how productive they are. How hard you work should not factor into you having basic human rights. End of story. Being unemployed is not something that just happens to you in a vacuum. It typically has a reason, or more likely several reasons. The unemployment fairy doesn't just pop out from under your bed one day and your job is gone. And as an avid gamer, I've been especially disheartened by the recent slew of mass layoffs in the industry that has caused over 20,000 people to lose their jobs just over the last 2 years. And of course, as recently as COVID in 2020, 114 million people lost their jobs. And during the 2008 financial crisis, 30 million people in the US alone lost their jobs. The exact reasons for any one person's unemployment is probably a lot easier to figure out than that of an entire population. Now, to continue the trend of talking about me, myself, and I, the reason I have a hard time finding a job in general is fairly simple. I lack experience. Recently, I did manage to get a hold of some feedback from an employer for once, and the verdict confirms what I already suspected. I lack experience, so I automatically get sorted into the no pile, or if I'm a real good boy and really lucky, the maybe pile. Even the HR rep that I spoke to recognized that, man, it must be really hard for you to get any experience when it's hard for you to get a foot in anywhere.
Well, duh.
In order to balance out all this talk of feelings, however, I thought I would oblige Daddy Shapiro for a second with some cold hard facts. I'll start by looking at a meta-analysis published in 2022 titled
The Relationship Between Unemployment and Well-Being, an updated meta-analysis of longitudinal evidence.
It's built off of several other meta-analyses made in 1999, 2005, and then 2009 respectively. These have evolved over time to include more variables relating to mental health, and in the latest study it also encompasses sort of overall well-being. That being said, it still has a strong focus on mental health. The meta-analysis was done on 29 studies between 1990 and 2020, a 30-year span. A partial reason for that span is there were none, or at the very least very few studies on the subject at all from anything earlier than maybe the mid-80s. And the first meta-analysis published on the subject in 1999 only used studies done during the 90s. Point being, it's sort of a young research area, not unemployment itself, but unemployment in relation to mental health, which also is because psychology and mental health is young as a research subject in general. Another thing that is worth keeping in mind is they only use studies in countries within the global south, or the so-called developed countries. So, the overall conclusions of the study are, and I really need you to sit down for this one because it's a shocker, unemployment has a significant negative impact on mental health and lowers overall life satisfaction. And the negative effect is also stronger the longer the unemployment lasts. Is that men's well-being is, generally speaking, more negatively affected by unemployment than women's, especially in more socially conservative countries. And the study points out that this is, of course, due to gendered expectations. Men are expected to be the breadwinners, and their masculine identity is therefore more closely tied to their ability to work. Compare this to women, who are generally less expected by default to be the breadwinner of a household, instead having more domestic labor expectations that might put less pressure on unemployed women to find a job. That being said, domestic labor expectations are not pressure-free either. The study also admits that this has and is shifting, especially in more egalitarian countries, which means that we might see a convergence in the future, which in layman's terms means that unemployed women will be equally as miserable as unemployed men. Yay! The study also points out the vicious cycle that people can end up in. If you become unemployed and your well-being worsens, that poor well-being then affects your capacity to apply for jobs, which in turn can worsen your well-being further, and so on.
In fact, poor well-being can hinder the job search process of the unemployed by influencing their effort, motivation, and job search self-efficacy.
So, what solutions does the study present for these problems? Well, strong support systems, for one, that help those willing and able get into the job market. Another one is providing social resources in order for people to build networks. It's incredibly vital to have this, because on a purely theoretical level, we live in a meritocracy. But in reality over here, who you know is almost just as important as your credentials in a lot of cases. And having access to strong social networks also prevents people from feeling isolated, which is something that can increase the risk of serious mental health issues if you are isolated, that is, potentially creating the vicious cycle that we were talking about earlier.
Thus, policies should maintain and supplement resources for individuals, for example by supporting more effective job search techniques for the unemployed, to prevent those searching becoming disheartened by the lack of positive outcomes. In this sense, provision of financial and emotional support and promoting social activities enabling creation of support networks and career contacts are essential in assisting individuals to cope with unemployment and enabling a successful transition to employment.
Also worth mentioning, though, is that even if support systems like unemployment benefits or universal credit are in place, a lot of people making use of those have to constantly prove themselves worthy of that support. I personally have had many close friends deal with exactly this. They need to work on their health, mental or physical, or both, in order to even be able to think about getting into the job market. But staying in contact with the authorities handing out the support and proving to them that you do in fact need the support can be exhausting enough on its own when you're already too depressed to get out of bed and make yourself breakfast most days. If we had something like universal basic income in place, these people could focus on things that actually benefit them and society significantly more than working the full-time job of dealing with bureaucratic bullshit. In my own experience, something that being unemployed has sort of taken away from me is feeling grounded to another group of human beings based on some common goal, or at the very least, a physical place where we gather in on the daily. It's something I did get while studying, as well as, of course, while working at the student union. Now, perhaps this sense of community at work that is provided to us in modern Western society is easy to overlook until you sort of lose it. And if you don't feel any sense of community at your place of work, which, let's be honest, that's very likely as well, you might seek that community elsewhere or risk feeling alienated from society altogether. That's not to say that all my study mates and co-workers in the past have always been my favorite people to be around. You know the type. After a hard noon of not responding to any of your messages, they then proceed to microwave fish in the office break room. But all joking aside, I also do think it's a good growth exercise having to deal with and even collaborate with people you wouldn't necessarily want to hang out with voluntarily. But all these reflections and thoughts got me curious as to what, if any, research existed on the topic, and the topic being workplace as a source of community. Now, this curiosity led me to an interesting case study that relates a little bit to my own situation. The study came out in 2017 and is on a single community based around a so-called co-working space, and therefore looks at how remote workers, freelancers, and generally self-employed people construct a community around a shared physical space, rather than that of a shared employer. They pay a monthly fee to gain access to some kind of office or workspace, and on the daily meet people to sort of work alongside, despite not working for the same company and not even necessarily within the same sector. Keep in mind that this is a qualitative study based on interviews with just 19 people from this one co-working space. So these findings aren't really going to be representative of anything, but I found them interesting nonetheless, and I felt like sharing them with you. The overall results were that people found the sense of community that they had around this co-working space to be the most important part of it. The authors refer to 4 dimensions of community that the interviewees experienced. That is, collective identity, filling a social void, sense of ownership, and genuine friendship. Their collective identity is created around their membership in the co-working space, similar to how working for a company might create a collective identity around working for that specific company. It's basically the baseline for what they can build the community around.
To me now, it feels like a club. It feels like we're our own team, even though the only tie that binds us is that we're all members of the space.
Filling a social void is about alleviating isolation, in particular the one that can come from working from home. Some people reported trying coffee shops or other public spaces, but they didn't really feel like it alleviated the isolation, since it's not like they were socializing with random strangers at Starbucks.
There are people there, but I'm not actively talking to people. And I remember just feeling like one day wanting to scream out like, somebody talk to me, because I wasn't talking to anybody.
Sense of ownership is about feeling like you have a say in and have a responsibility for the community space in question. For example, volunteering for cleanup work or assisting with renovations. All of this because of a social responsibility to contribute to the community beyond just your own needs.
Members realize that this space is valuable to me and I want to ensure its survival, and so they were actively engaged in making sure it survives.
Genuine friendships are something that many described directly in contrast with previous work settings. Due to the reduction of workplace drama and competitiveness that can happen in a traditional workplace, they felt more free to form honest and genuine connections with their co-workers.
Members described these relationships as different from typical coworker relationships, because at Welcome, there were no office politics, no pressure of hierarchical or dependent relationships, or coworkers without having the drama of coworkers.
While making this script, as well as applying for jobs, I've spent a not insignificant amount of time at my local university campus, hanging out with friends on a daily basis. Basically, using it as a co-working space. So I can relate to the dimensions of community in the study, perhaps mostly when it comes to filling a social void and less so the others. It's nice having people to chat shit with. Now, of course, me having access to this unique co-working space is dependent on me already having studied and knowing people who still study at this particular university that I also live close enough to, which is fairly specific, right? Similar to how co-working spaces do require you to already have a job or be running a business and therefore be able to afford the monthly cost of membership. So in theory, you get the benefits of having coworkers without any of the downsides. Of course, it's not that simple. I'm sure co-working spaces still have the potential to be distracting. For example, having people to chat with can be distracting. But on the other hand, those distractions might lead to well-needed breaks that you would not have taken if you just sat at home. Regardless, I find it interesting that such a strong sense of community can be built around this kind of space. In the study, they cite that people remembered birthdays, reached out to like let people know at this particular co-working space that they were dealing with like personal health issues or like their family was taking ill. So they really treated this as like a strong community they went back to for support. And maybe this community form is so strong in part because you can choose who you spend your workdays with. Now, to wrap up a video that is probably already like twice as long as I initially planned, despite all my complaining, do I think getting a job will solve all my mental health problems? Hell no. More likely, it will solve my financial woes and then unleash other fresh horrors upon me. A comment I read on the music video for the Smiths song Heaven Knows I'm Miserable Now said it perfectly. The two worst feelings in modern society are not having a job and having a job.
I was looking for a job and then I found a job, and heaven knows I'm miserable now.
After finally getting some kind of employment or income, I'm gonna have to make new goals to strive towards to give life meaning, I guess. And once those have been achieved, the cycle is just gonna continue. Not too long ago, my master's thesis felt like my big project that's gonna make me feel oh so satisfied and happy once I complete it. And while it was immensely satisfying to finish, the initial dopamine kick that I got from that faded quite quickly and just left me in search of my next goal, getting a job in this case. And if I'm perfectly honest, when I really think about it, there are two things that truly bring me happiness: my relationships to my partner, friends and family, and personal growth, whatever shape that takes. I love feeling like I've overtaken my former self in terms of knowledge, skills, as well as compassion and empathy. And these are overarching life goals that you never really finish striving towards. And it's something that I would prefer to focus on, and maybe less so on these productivity-based goals that at the end of the day are quite fleeting. Now, my hope is that this video will be a stepping stone for me to create more ambitious content in the future. As part of the research for this video, I considered including discussions about much broader issues related to unemployment, like poverty, homelessness, education levels and access to education, bullshit jobs, job automation, and AI. In the end, I decided I wanted to have a little more focused video, primarily so that I would actually finish it. However, if you'd like to see future videos covering some of those topics and more, hit the like button, subscribe, comment, and all that jazz. All my sources are linked in the description, and if you'd like to support me further, you can buy me a coffee on Ko-Fi.